AMD, I think like a top 3 last I checked in your fund behind Nvidia, but a top player. There's a big gap between the revenue we're expected to see from AMD this afternoon, though, and Nvidia. So how do they live up to these standards?
Well, AMD is a very different story, Oliver. While Nvidia is already well into its cycle for GPUs, AMD is at the bottom of their cycle. So they not only make data center chips, but they're exposed to client, like computers, as well as gaming and embedded chips that go in all kinds of industries. And all of those have really seen and gone through a big downturn, and we're looking for those to bottom. The data center segment, we're pretty confident will deliver very strong numbers. And in addition to GPUs, which is what everybody has been excited about, that's the Milano, the M300 GPU. In addition to that, we believe they will deliver strong CPUs as well, strong data center revenue overall.
AMD also reported earnings after the bell. Earnings and revenues beat estimates, but gaming and embedded segment revenues declined year over year. And AMD gave guidance for second quarter revenue in line with many expectations.
AMD just reported its 2024 quarter one results, and the numbers came as a welcome surprise to investors because they were slightly higher than expected, beating analysts' estimates of a revenue of $5.45 billion and an EPS of $0.61. AMD reported a revenue of $5.47 billion and EPS came in at $0.62, so it's a very slight beat here. But overall, the numbers were very in line with what was expected from the company. Despite this, AMD stock reacted negatively to the earnings, dropping 7% in extended trading. And in order to find out why this happened, we have to go through the company's earnings report and determine what these numbers mean for the company and AMD stock investors. But before we go into AMD's earnings, if you want to keep up with AMD's latest updates and keep up with the stock market's latest news, you can follow our Twitter account. We post multiple times daily about the biggest changes and catalysts in the market, so click the follow button if you don't want to miss the newest market updates. Now, back to today's video.
Looking for the commentary around what they see for AI, how much can they sell us on that at this point when their expected growth is still single digits the next couple quarters out, according to the analyst estimates I'm looking at? I mean, should they even be in the same conversation as a Supermicro and Nvidia? Supermicro is going to give us 200% this afternoon.
Well, Oliver, to my prior point, they just entered this market. So I believe, yes, they should be in this bucket because they can capture a pretty significant size of the market, given the product they've introduced and the lineup that we see ahead. So the point here is that you're going from close to zero to 10 plus billion of revenues over a very short period of time. So this year, the company guided to 3.5 billion of AI or GPU revenues, and that is going from zero last year. So if they continue on that growth path, AI could be a real driver for them. And one thing that I would add is that expectations a few months ago got a little bit ahead of themselves, where investors expected that 3.5 to be more like 7 or 8. Those expectations have now significantly come down, mostly because of people are concerned about supply constraints and whether they're going to be able to secure enough memory and packaging. So those expectations have really come down closer to 5.5, 6 billion, which is, in our opinion, very achievable.
For the company's quarter one results, AMD's revenue was up about 2% from a year earlier. The company reported net income of $123 million versus a net loss of $139 million, or 9 cents per share, during the same period in the previous year. The chipmaker said its closely watched data center segment grew 80% year over year to $2.3 billion thanks to sales of its MI300 series AI chips, which are meant to compete with Nvidia's graphics processing units. CEO Lisa Su said that Microsoft, Meta, and Oracle use AMD's MI300X, adding that AMD had sold over $1 billion of the chips since it launched in the fourth quarter of 2023. This is what led the company to raise its forecast for MI300X sales, saying that it expects $4 billion in 2024 AI chip sales, up from a $3.5 billion forecast it had made in January. Meanwhile, AMD's original business, processors for chips and PCs, reported $1.4 billion in Q1 sales, an 85% annual increase, suggesting that last year's PC slump is over. AMD also shared its guidance for Q2, saying that it expects about $5.7 billion in sales, which is actually in line with Wall Street estimates of the same approximate total, and that would represent about 6% annual growth. While AMD's results were great, they weren't enough to stop the stock from sliding. And one possible reason behind this drop is how AMD's gaming segment performed. The gaming segment was down 48% year over year to $922 million, which the company said was due to lower chip sales for game consoles and PCs. Also, the company's embedded segment, made up of products acquired as part of the Xilinx acquisition in 2022, didn't do well, as its sales dropped 46% year over year to $846 million, lagging Wall Street expectations of $942 million. But aside from these segments disappointing investors, there are other reasons behind the stock dropping after earnings, and we're going to explore them now. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Investocracy.
So in Advanced Micro's case, there is still just a drag from the more cyclical legacy hardware PC products akin to like what we see in Intel numbers. It still has some of that baggage that's holding back the top line, while the core AI growth should be there. Do you expect them to really separate that out? Will they give us like a formal AI-only number?
Yeah, absolutely. They break out their segments pretty well, where they not only give an AI number or a GPU number, they also provide a data center number that includes their other chips they're selling to the data center segment. So that's what we're looking for to learn on the earnings call. Another thing that we're very focused on is how quickly can they now introduce a new chip to keep up with Nvidia's product intro. I think one thing about Nvidia that people missed or didn't appreciate enough is how they changed their product introduction cycle from 2+ years to 1 year, and that makes it a little more challenging for companies to compete, companies like AMD. So AMD announced their chip this year. Now we're already looking for them to come up with a new chip for next year to compete with the Blackwell chip.
Boy, seems like a lot. I mean, look, it sounds very exciting, but also seems like a lot to ask looking so far into the future for a company up 80% in the past year, trading at a 44 times forward, trailing 250. I mean, how much do you need to blow this out of the water, Ivana? Is there any worry that concentration in these chips, if there's disappointment, is going to hit your fund and take back some of the big gains that you've had?
Well, Oliver, we are really focused on fundamentals, and from the fundamental perspective, it's not unusual to see companies trade at high multiples where their earnings are at the bottom of the cycle. So that gives us confidence on the valuation side. And then if you look at the earnings estimates for this year, not for this quarter, for the full year for AMD, people are expecting only few $1 billion improvement over last year. Well, we already know that 3.5 is going to come from AI. Conservatively, right? It could be as high as 5+ as analysts are expecting. So we're pretty confident on the earnings side as well. So putting together the multiple or the valuation with the earnings gives us pretty high confidence here. And there's always a disappointment possible on earnings, right? There's all of these other segments that could drive a miss versus what the street is expecting. So that's a risk that investors, especially like technology investors, always have to be aware. These companies are pretty volatile on earnings, but even in general, like AMD is now down 30% off their high, right? So this is not a small move. But usually these pullbacks are good entry points.
Many investors and analysts alike thought that AMD stock was overvalued after earnings, especially since the company's Q2 guidance is around the same as what it achieved in Q1. So a sell-off happening because investors wanted to take some profits isn't really too surprising. The downside could also be an effect of Supermicrocomputer reporting its earnings, as AMD stock is also down more than 10%, and that led to Nvidia stock also being down around 2%. Additionally, maybe investors were simply expecting a bit more from AMD. We've been hearing about AI and GPU demand for the past 2 years, and we've seen how much Nvidia has achieved, so this sentiment could have had something to do with the sell-off. Some people are also saying that many stocks dropped that day, including AMD, because Jerome Powell is set to speak on Wednesday, but that isn't enough to justify a major sell-off, in my opinion. As investors, we invest in companies that have great growth prospects over the future, so we shouldn't be too worried about what goes on during the next day or week, or even the next quarter. AMD is a company that has a lot of positive surrounding it, which is why the current dip in the stock price could actually be a great buying opportunity. And that's what we're going to talk about now. If you made it this far into the video, thank you. These videos take a lot of effort and time to make, so if you enjoyed them, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. This goes a long way in helping us grow. That said, back to the video.
What's the easiest answer for why the stock has underperformed these other names so dramatically?
Well,
whether it's a Broadcom, which is up 20% year to date, right? AMD's only up 9%. Okay, let's just put that on the table. Nvidia, for example, top of the heap, up 76%. Why is it?
You're describing
underperformed?
AI plays versus those that are not necessarily solely AI plays. More than 50% of AMD's business comes from embedded, gaming, PCs, and those don't necessarily benefit from this big AI boom.
Yeah, but they've made it pretty clear that they're coming, right?
That the improvement's coming in those segments is what you're asking.
Yeah, on
yeah,
AI.
in the second half.
Well, so some of these other companies are getting the benefit of the doubt.
But Broadcom and Marvell are specifically for custom AI chips, and so they're actually benefiting in the near term. Broadcom, for example, has the collaboration with Google, so there's that difference, which is why they're seeing a bigger upside right now versus AMD that is still exposed to the cyclical nature of the chip space.
All right, they need to talk about AI like 3,000 times
Well,
on the
yeah,
call.
I wonder, there's AI fatigue to a certain point now, where some investors like we're not seeing the actual monetization. I know this goes into greater tech as a whole, but there's only so much you can say AI and say that it's going to bring in revenues, and then it doesn't.
Well, let's talk about that downside. And we have a chart here on the corrective pullback with risks to 4,800 that I wanted to pull up for you here, John. I'm curious if you can speak to what we're seeing in this chart when it comes to the potential risk for us to get back down to 4,800 here, and what the catalyst might be to push us down to that level.
Sure. So basically what I'm outlining in my notes to clients is that I believe that we are in a correction. This is not a bear market, right? This is just a corrective process. In a lot of ways, you can kind of think of this as the market's working out their excessive bullish sentiment from the beginning of the year. Also, from a seasonal standpoint, this part of the election cycle from mid-April to about June, markets tend to pull back. So kind of par for the course-ish. But like I said, the decline that we saw in April was accompanied by a lot of heavy volume. So what typically transpires is called an ABC correction. A is the initial decline down. B is the oversold rally, which is where we are right now. And then finally, you get the C wave lower. And that C wave lower is where you truly get folks bearish, right? You really see the whites in their eyes. Some of the sentiment data that's been released during this month has gotten better, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's really showing signs of capitulation quite yet. In terms of catalysts, I have my eye very, very much closely on what's going on with the Fed and these hawkish macro trends that have been going on all year.
During the earnings call, AMD CEO Lisa Su told analysts that the company believes it had taken market share in the server CPU segment, likely from Intel, which is struggling to compete with both AMD and Nvidia. Su also said that AMD sees signs of improving demand for its CPUs due to the AI server boom. She also said that AMD was currently working on new AI chips and successors to the current generation, which is extremely important for AMD if it really wants to compete with Nvidia, as Nvidia releases a new chip almost on a yearly basis, and AMD needs to start doing the same if it wants to keep up. Su also talked about how AMD is getting much closer with its top AI customers, including giants like Microsoft and Meta, who give AMD significant feedback on its roadmap. These close partnerships could help AMD sell more chips to these partners in the future, as well as develop new and impressive technologies. AMD already realizes this, as it recently announced a new partnership with Lenovo that is set to power the next wave of financial services infrastructure. Under the terms of the partnership, AMD and Lenovo will develop a versatile multi-node server built for demanding transaction processing, which will be powered by AMD processors to optimize processing power in a compact form. It's supposed to help in essential tasks like fraud detection, identity verification, high-frequency trading, risk management, credit issuance, wealth management, and compliance with regulations. Not only that, but it's also being built for economic forecasting. This system will trim power use in the financial sector by nearly 1/3 when matched with typical other servers, meaning that it's an eco-friendlier and cost-efficient option for businesses handling intensive transaction workloads. So, AMD's PC processors also have a lot of potential. They can run AI programs locally, which would allow AMD to power the so-called AI PCs that many industry participants are banking on to drive new laptop and desktop sales. Additionally, the company is just getting started when it comes to AI chips and GPUs, and the fact that it raised its full-year revenue guidance for its AI chips means that demand is there, and that even if the majority of the market is dominated by Nvidia, AMD still found a place in it. Therefore, it's very likely that a major turnaround for AMD is coming, especially now after the sell-off that brought it back down to a more realistic valuation and gave investors an idea of what to really expect from AMD. But what are your thoughts, though? What do you think about AMD's Q1 earnings? Did you buy AMD stock after earnings? Are you planning to buy more? Let us know in the comment section. If you would like to know more about the latest updates about AMD and the chip market, then go ahead and click on the next video on your screen. See you there.